You ever settle in to watch a historical movie and you get that little feeling in the back of your head? Wait a second, did that actually happen? It's a great question. I mean, from these huge epic battles to really personal biopics, Hollywood absolutely loves bringing the past to life. But, the history we see on the big screen, it's often a completely different world from the history we find in books. So today, let's pull back the curtain and really look at that fascinating and sometimes pretty shocking gap between fact and film. Okay, let's start with a perfect example. The Oscar-winning movie, A Man for All Seasons. It paints this picture of Sir Thomas More as this incredibly noble martyr, a man of unshakable conscience. And it's a powerful, really inspiring story. But here's the twist. According to his own biographer, the real Thomas More was a religious fanatic who literally cheered for the execution of his opponents. Whoa. That's not just, tweaking a few details. That is a total flip of the character. And this is exactly where our story really begins. And that gets us right to the heart of what you could call Hollywood's history problem. And it's not just about a few little changes here and there. We're talking about a massive, often surprising divide between what we see on screen and what's in the historical record. So let's really break down what that looks like. I mean, just look at this contrast. It is absolutely stark. On one side, the movie gives us this hero, this principled guy we can all admire. But on the other side, reality shows us a much more complicated and, let's be honest, pretty disturbing person. The movie gives us this clean moral clarity. History, it leaves us with all these messy, really uncomfortable truths. And this is not a one-off thing, not at all. For millions of us, George C. Scott is General Patton, Sir Ben Kingsley is Gandhi, Denzel Washington is Malcolm X. These performances are so powerful that they don't just show us history. A lot of the time, they actually replace it in our minds. They create this kind of Hollywood history where everything is simple, morally black and white, and there's none of that tedious complexity you find in real life. So here's the billion-dollar question. Why? Why does this happen over and over again? Are all these filmmakers just, bad at history? Or is there something way more deliberate going on? Let's dig into how, and more importantly, why history gets a major rewrite for the big screen. See, filmmakers aren't trying to write a history textbook. They're trying to tell a great story. And to do that, they have a very specific toolkit. They'll take these huge, sprawling historical events and narrow them down to a plot you can actually follow in 2 hours. They'll focus on just a couple of people so we have someone to root for. And of course, they often pump up the drama, adding love triangles, rivalries, all the stuff that keeps us glued to our seats. So they aren't necessarily getting it wrong, they're just translating it into the language of movies. And then, of course, there's the money. You gotta follow the money. As the filmmaker John Sayles points out, when a studio is sinking $100 million, or way more, into a movie, they are not taking any big risks. That film has to be a hit. It needs to appeal to the biggest possible audience to make all that cash back. And you know what's a tough sell? Complicated, morally gray history. And this quote right here, this just nails the central paradox, doesn't it? We, the audience, are drawn in by that little phrase, based on a true story. It gives the movie weight, legitimacy. It sells tickets. So filmmakers absolutely need that label for marketing, but they often have to totally bend the actual story to make a movie that people will actually want to go see. It's a really fascinating, tricky spot to be in. But here's a thought. What if we're looking at all of these movies completely the wrong way? What if they're not supposed to be history lessons that just happen to fail? What if there's something else entirely? Maybe we should just think of these films as their very own genre. Let's call it cinematic history. And in this genre, the rules are just different. The whole point isn't to get every single fact right. The point is to capture a bigger, more symbolic or emotional truth about a person or an event. Right. So a movie like Saving Private Ryan isn't trying to give you a perfect, comprehensive lecture on D-Day military strategy. No way. It's trying to make you feel the absolute terror, the chaos, and the insane courage of what it was like to be on that beach. It uses history to create an emotional experience that a textbook just never could. Okay, so filmmakers are chasing a feeling, an emotional truth, not a transcript of events. Fine. But so what? Why does any of this really matter? Well, as it turns out, the real-world stakes for this kind of storytelling are a lot higher than you might think. Let's get into that right now. It matters because for a shocking number of people, movies are the main way and sometimes the only way they learn about the past. Just look at this. For young adults especially, films aren't just entertainment. They are, very often, a much more powerful source of historical info than books are. And that gives movies this incredible, almost scary power to shape our collective memory of who we are and where we came from.
And hey, this is not a new thing. For more than 100 years, cinematic history has been this massive cultural force. I mean, from the very earliest days of silent film, movies haven't just reflected what we think about the past, they have actively shaped it, for better, and sometimes for much, much worse. And for a stark reminder of that power, you just have to look at the 1915 film The Birth of a Nation. Its incredibly racist version of the post-Civil War era was so powerful, so influential, that it's actually credited with helping to bring back the Ku Klux Klan. This just goes to show you, this isn't some dusty academic debate. Cinematic history can have profound, devastating, real-world consequences.
So how should we as viewers deal with all this? It's actually pretty simple. First, just know what you're watching. Remember, this is a drama, not a documentary. It's its own genre. And second, instead of just playing spot the mistake, ask a better question. What's the big idea here? What's the central feeling or truth that the filmmaker is trying to get across? If you do that, you can appreciate the film for what it is, a piece of art, while still thinking critically about the history. And in the end, it all brings us back to that amazing line from the classic Western, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. When the legend becomes fact, print the legend. But should we? It's a question with no easy answer, and it sits right at the very heart of Hollywood's messy, powerful, and totally permanent relationship with our past. Thanks for digging into all this with me.